welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we have an amazing power panel led by Atul Tandon, the CEO of Opportunity International, on the power of partnerships in a pandemic. Atul, welcome.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, George, the Ideagen community for inviting me back this time to talk about the power of partnerships in the pandemic. Coming to you from Seattle, Washington, Atul Tandon, CEO of Opportunity International. I have to say that what the pandemic the last year has demonstrated to all of us as leaders is a cascading series of crises and catastrophes that happened. Started with health, became economic, went on to incomes being lost by the poor, went on to as a consequence, no food on the table, kids not able to go to school, the schools were closed, and then alongside came the social crisis, political crisis. So this sort of whole system crisis, of course, demands a whole system response. And what it told us and demonstrated to us as leaders was the interconnectedness. So then the solutions as well have to be interconnected. The solutions as well have to be interdependent. The recognition that no one organization or person can actually address all of these, that we had to do this together. My mind goes back, the wisdom of the ancients in many ways. There's an African proverb that says, when you want to go fast, go alone. When you want to go far, go with friends. So I'm delighted and honored to invite three friends today into this discussion. All three have traveled long and far with Opportunity in our focus on bringing surviving help and thriving help and aid to the extremely poor of the world. So with that, let me add Laura Hemrika. She's the head of the Credit Suisse Foundation and global head of CSR for Credit Suisse based in Geneva. Mukti Bosco, my fellow Indian from the extreme west of India and heads up the Healing Fields Foundation, has had a storied journey and career in bringing health benefits and aid and preparedness to millions of Indian families in some of the poorest parts of the country, and a celebrated humanitarian and activist in India. So Mukti, welcome. And as well from the west of Africa this time, Dr. Katey Assem. Katey is both a colleague and a friend. He is the chair of Opportunity's Bank in Ghana, Opportunity International Savings and Loans, probably one of the most celebrated, highly ranked social banks in West Africa, as well as sits on the International Board of Opportunity. Came to us earlier in his career in academics in the Chicagoland area. So welcome all three of you, and we want to talk a bit about both your personal and professional reactions to this question of how your organizations, if you will, responded, recognized that partnerships were needed, and your own response to COVID-19. And let me just begin with a little bit about opportunities. Is that as we faced up the pandemic, and what we realized was that our programs needed to shift very rapidly because the people we were serving had no incomes, couldn't pay back their loans. So, all right, let's negotiate with our partners to put a loan moratoria in place. We help support thousands of schools in Asia and Africa. So let's get those, how do we help those schools survive the pandemic, stay open, keep their teachers engaged, and do what they can to help the students. Our donors and partners and funders, without their help, we couldn't have done a Survive to Thrive strategy. And then, on the global landscape, making sure that the issue and the impact of the crisis on the poor was front and center. So organizations like Ideagen. So it's been a whole enterprise experience for us. So let me turn over to Laura and start with her with the question. Tell us a bit about your organization and how COVID-19 has shifted your approach to leadership and to partnership. So let's start with Laura, with yourself. Over to you.
Thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me to join you today, Atul, with such esteemed fellow panelists. It's really an honor. Credit Suisse, like many of the global banks, really wanted in this crisis in COVID, we wanted and needed to be part of the solution of this crisis. And as, of course, big financial players, we're absolutely well placed to do that. My team, the area that I head at the bank, which is corporate citizenship and foundations, is actually the team that's in charge of all of the bank's social commitments, our philanthropic giving, our partnerships with NGOs, the engagement of our employees and our experts in tackling some of the large social challenges and issues in this world. And COVID really, in fact, that was one of the areas where we, of course, came front and center of being part of the solution. Our business did as well, supporting our clients. But when it came to the communities near and far, that was certainly where we saw that this part of the bank was key in providing solutions. Our work relies heavily on partnerships at the best of times. And when you ask, did our approach to partnerships change or how is that any different? The answer is actually not at all. Not at all. But that's because our partnerships are deep. They're long over time, and they're built on trust. And if anything, this was the moment, with the feet to the fire, essentially, the moment of truth. When we say trust, do we genuinely trust? And was that trust well placed? It's easy. The word partnership is easy to use and throw around. When everything's going well, and when there is no real challenge, and when you're building and creating together, when the times are good. But trust is really tested when things don't go as well, and when you're really placed with a scenario where no, you can't look each other necessarily in the eye, other than through a Zoom call. You can't sit together, and you can't go and visit what's happening on the ground or what's happening at your partner's place of work or activity. And so for us, this was the moment we said, okay, you've been our partner so far, so long. Needless to say, banks like to do diligence, everything and everybody. So that had been done, but we trusted you until now. If we genuinely have that partnership and trust, then now is when that counts most. And it did. And I'm glad to say that we were not disappointed. I believe our partners were pleased as well, because it's with trust that we were able to say, you know what, we will give you the money that we had planned to give you for your programming this year. We may not be able to deliver, you may not be able to deliver on the programming, but we trust you to redirect that money where you need to redirect it in order to help your organization survive this pandemic, help you keep your employees employed, and help you support your beneficiaries, which at times it was more important to make sure beneficiaries received food than maybe a loan or an education, but that could be done. And we therefore also adapted, what we were expecting back from our partners in such a difficult crisis time, so as to not over burden them with processes and procedures at a moment of crisis, and saying rather, you'll get back to us. You'll tell us what you did and how you did this, and that was key. And we were happy and humbled by what everyone was able to do, and continue to be. It's not over yet, so I think we have to keep at it.
You're so right, Laura. It's not over yet, but I have to say it's been what you talked about here. Shared thinking and shared planning. All right, and then mutually dependent, if you will, implementation. So with that, let me turn over to Katey. Katey, you were right at the forefront of the pandemic. I mean, you were right in the streets of Ghana and across Accra, and you saw the firsthand, the impact. And in your role now as the chair of the bank, I mean, you were dealing not only with both at the family and the staff level with the pandemic clients, but as well organizationally. So tell us a bit about your experience and that of OISL.
thank you, Atul, for having me, and thank you to Ideagen. This is an excellent panel. Our experience was similar to what Laura described. In the middle of this pandemic, what we realized was that partnership was key. And so we pivoted on partnership and our leadership within the community. So we had to get out. We had to make sure that everybody who surrounds our client was involved in our decision-making processes. For example, one of the first things, I'm a mathematician, so I can't help but think mathematically. What I did with the staff was to talk about needing to put together a triangle of stakeholders, regulators, and staff. And in the center of that triangle were our clients. And the client circle touched each line of the triangle, if you will. And so we needed to make sure that everything that we did along our line, either as staff, as regulators, or as stakeholders, touched the client in a positive way. And that it impacted our clients positively, whether it was their health, whether it was their well-being, whether it was their social standing in the community. We made sure that we took care of that. For example, with our shareholders, we began to raise questions about how do we now measure PAR or capital adequacy ratio within this pandemic period? How do we maintain fiscal responsibility? For our regulators, we had conversations with them, with the Bank of Ghana. Would they allow us to extend the terms of our loans without us having any penalty on us and without that impacting on our capital adequacy ratio? For staff, we looked at our banking operations, their safety, their health, working from home, of course, but also making sure that the banks remained open, and making sure that when people came into the bank, that it was a sanitized environment and that their health were key. People felt comfortable. We allowed some staff to stay home. We staggered the staff. And then for clients, we literally got out. We got out, as you said, in the streets. We provided our clients with hand sanitizers. We provided them with face masks and made sure that they were taken care of. So it was in the midst of this kind of partnership that everything worked for our clients. And lastly, the other thing we did was the IVRs. Mm-hmm. We translated them into several languages to make sure that clients could speak. We made sure that our technology systems were operating well. We invested more into our IVR. So, when Laura talks about what to do with some of the funding, Atul, the opportunity provided us with some funding, and we made sure that we strengthened our technology so that we could take care of some of our translations to make sure that our clients could be reached where they were, rather than having them come into the bank all the time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Katey. And integrated voice response. I go back to my banking days
Yes.
where you call into the bank and there is an automated, essentially voice response system. And I think what remarkable what you guys did almost overnight went from having the voice response in one language to almost 7 languages. And the reason was simple, because your clients, to remind the audience, the opportunities, banking customers, about 12 million savers around the world. In Ghana's, of course, very big, with over 500,000. Average deposit size of $42. But in this case, Katey's organization bank had 7 languages in which those 500,000 of his clients could speak with them. So that kind of response to in fact, going back to Laura Hemrika, that both Credit Suisse is funding, but as well executive support, volunteer support, expert support has made possible alongside opportunity. So you start to think about the interconnectedness. Let me turn now to Mukti, to Mukti Bosco. Mukti, your context is probably one of the most should have been and would have been stressful. I mean, you've got literally thousands of women, many of them with very basic education and poor skills, who you're training to take primary health and prevention techniques, if you will, into the homes and huts of millions of other women who have children at home to take care and look after them. So I can't think of a more of a context and situation where you've got both your partners, the thousands of women who you've trained, and your clients both are stressed, right? There's no running water. The village streets, if you will, are not tarred over, right? When the rain falls, it comes right onto the floor through the roof. So take us to that context. What happened? How did you deal with the pandemic, and still are?
Yeah, in India, it was, the visuals were very striking, because not just the pandemic, the sudden lockdown that the government announced, and the migrants from different cities started going back home on foot or on cycles or any possible transportation that was available to them. And the migrant exodus, I think, was the largest after the India-Pakistan partition that happened in 1947. And it was a huge human tragedy. Apart from that, even at the villages, with the sudden lockdown that was announced and the pandemic, there was a lot of fear. That was the first striking thing that came out. Fear, because nobody knew what the pandemic was. Nobody could understand why the whole country had come to a standstill. Nobody could understand why everything was shut. And our women, the community health entrepreneurs that we have trained, they came up, and their agency and their leadership came to the fore. Even though, as you say, Atul, they are semi-literate, but they were much stronger and more confident than any literate person in the country. They took charge of the communities that they lived in, whether they were their clients or anybody. It really didn't matter to them. In a pandemic, it really doesn't matter whether they are a client or anybody else. And the first thing they did was they started educating them, giving preventive education on what the virus was and how do you prevent it. And many of them started stitching masks in their house and started distributing it for free in their villages. With our support, they started setting up quarantine centers for these migrant labor who were coming back home, because the fear was they were going to bring the virus back home. Thankfully, in many places, most of the places, more than 90% of the places, the migrants did not bring the virus back home. But they made sure, the women, the community health entrepreneurs, made sure there was a safe place, there was food that was available, as well as there was medical care that was available to them when they reached back home. Apart from that, because of everything shut, livelihoods came to a standstill. And there were a lot of ultra poor families in their communities. So the women rose up to the occasion. They started sharing their own food. Then when we started distributing rations, they ensured that they prioritized the poorest of the poor, the elderly, and the children, and started distributing ration in that community. And our microfinance partner uh, got most of their money back. 105% was their repayment, thanks to the community health entrepreneurs, because they went home to work home and educated them as to why they should repay the loan. So one big lesson for us in this whole pandemic was women, if when they are given education and when they are taught a skill, they will use it for the whole community. Their leadership was the one which came to the fore, their agency that came to the fore. Even the women who did not have a digital phone borrowed somebody else's and used it to attend the training on preventive education so that she could go home and teach the others in her community how to prevent. She started doing a lot of health education programs like hand wash, physical distancing, and wearing of the mask, and started also reverse quarantining the vulnerable. The other major problem that we had was access to healthcare. Many of the hospitals shut down, and many of the government hospitals were designated as COVID hospitals, and therefore they were not treating regular patients. Some of our women had become ASHA workers, that's a frontline health worker at the village level. They took it upon themselves to ensure safe delivery of pregnant women, to ensure that the women stayed healthy, the pregnant women stayed healthy, and some of the TB patients got their TB medication on time. And we also partnered with another organization called Grambani, where they had IVRL, that is basically through a telephone, you could call a helpline and you could get information not only on COVID, but also mental health, because there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of anxiety, and a lot of anger. Anger because they didn't know how they were going to feed their children because there was no livelihood. And this particular support helpline helped them to have somebody to talk to. And they could also reach out for medical help. And it took a while for the government agencies at the community level to start functioning, but they did. When they did, the Samaj is a community where our women, our community health entrepreneurs became most important members of the Samaj. Sarkar is the government, and Bazaar, of course, all of these three came together to be able to support, and each one of them showed their leadership. And during COVID was one time that the government reached out to the nonprofit organizations, to the NGOs, to the civil society, to go out into the communities to support, to help, and to provide help to the community. Apart from that, Healing Fields Foundation also saw many of the places that we work are the poorest places, like in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Orissa. And many of the migrant labor were from these states. And therefore, Healing Fields, what we did was we sent out about 47 bus loads of migrants back to their homes, and we activated the quarantine centers through our community health facilitators. And once they reached there, they were received with dignity, because dignity was extremely important. And they were received with dignity, they were housed with dignity. And after their 14-day quarantine, they were also we had also the community health entrepreneurs help them to get a job card so that they can get the entitlements from the government. So pandemic taught us, even in remote areas, people could use digital technology with a little bit of support, with a little bit of nudging. And when you educate a woman, when you support a woman, the whole community benefits from her education, from her skill, and their leadership and their agency came to the fore.
Wow, what a story! I mean, what a story! Thank you so much. And we are all gathered together, and as I know we are listening to each other. I mean, my mind goes back to with Laura, one of the world's finest financial institutions, asset managers, investment managers, to Mukti's community health workers, right, frontline, partially literate, and started with the similar journey, and similar where we are is you start with not knowing what to do and how to react, but then lean into yourself and lean in on others around you who you trust and know. The whole system crisis leads to and led to a whole system response where we reached out and started to hold hands and come together. I'm just struck by, even in the short conversation, about the shared recognition of the crisis, right? The shared thinking that's gone on at the international level, but then at the very, very local level. Whether it's voice response in Ghana, whether it is Mukti's community health workers taking on things from delivering babies to clean water, or Credit Suisse decision, okay, use the money the best you can, because that's what's needed right now. Planning, implementation, and I have to say joint celebration in some ways. As I pause here, and I want to come back to that, is how do we celebrate what's happened? But as we look at today and we look at going forward, let me ask you, if you will, I know we'll be coming up on time, but I do want to, how do you see and what do you think are the changes that will stick in leadership and partnership? What's emerged in your mind as the most important lessons here, and what will stick as you now take this forward? The crisis is not over. We're still in the middle of it. As the sun rises, I'm sure more crises will follow. So with that, let me turn over to Laura. What do you see what are the lessons learned, and what do you still see sticking?
Yeah, I guess we can talk about somewhat of a silver lining in that respect, I guess, around the crisis. And I mean, it was so well illustrated with what Mukti had to say, where the line between where I sit and to where Mukti sits could not be longer, practically, literally around the world. And between a banker and one of these community health workers who is going to deliver babies, and yet there must be a link. That link must be there, and everything that we can do to, at least in knowledge and collaboration, shorten the line, we should do. And I think what's become very obvious is that partnership is imperative in addressing some of these huge challenges. Mukti and the healthcare workers can't do it alone, and we here in Switzerland can access capital, mobilize capital from others. But if we don't have trusted partners who know what the reality on the ground is, and that reality is different in India than it is where Katey is in Ghana, then that money is wasted. We don't have that. We don't have that physical presence, and we have our piece of the expertise puzzle, but we absolutely need that of Mukti, Katey, and all the other impressive individuals who are doing work on the ground. And we care about efficient use of money. Well, you need to partner with other experts in order to make sure that that's indeed what happens with the money, and that you achieve that social impact that you're looking for, or the environmental impact, or whatever it might be. And so bringing home that message of everyone has their part to play and must be part of the conversation, must be part of the solution, and that you cannot innovate in a vacuum, because this kind of crisis requires innovation in order to find the solution. And if you're doing that by yourself, it's what's going to trigger different thinking and what's going to trigger the right solutions. And that requires working together. And it goes back to trust, because innovation in the crisis situation, in any situation, is probably going to be a messy process, right? It looks great. The book at the end of the story is awesome and exciting and a neat story, but the process of it is a lot messier than the book might necessarily reflect. And so I think understanding of what partnership means is one thing that'll stay with us, and acknowledgement of that need.
Yeah, I would also, you started, Laura, with the comment, and the recognition that, well, we have to build partnership as a day-to-day business, and the point that you had a set of trusted partners who you had selected and worked with over a period of time.
Absolutely.
And, it's, the whole interconnectedness of the crisis and the solution leads to sort of this recognition that we are interdependent, and your response talks to that interdependence.
Yeah.
Katey, let me turn to you. As you look at and you've been obviously leading a frontline social bank, but you've been a leader in many different spheres, in the academic, in the civil society, now in the social sector, and in many different cultures. So talk to us a little bit about, what do you think about leadership strategies and partnership, and what will stick as we go forward from here?
Well, I think that leadership has to become effective. And effective leadership going forward is going to become vital. And that vitality, as Laura was saying, is in the interconnectedness between community and individual. It also will depend on how well we communicate. When we talk about the interactive voice recognition response messages, for example, we need leaders who speak many languages. I speak 17 different languages. So when I'm out in the marketplace, I can speak to our people in their native language. And so they don't see me as this guy who's way up there and they're way down there. We have to come down to their level. And we have to not only,
before you go forward. So I speak about 6 languages, and I was feeling very good about my own life and my own self till I just heard you. So, folks, 17 languages. I'm going to turn back to you, but I could not let that pass. But I think that also points, Katey, to the point of that we live in cultures that are mutually connected. People who are mutually connected, and how do you go from one to the other? So yeah, back to you. I am impressed, and I think I'm going to go back and pick up another language book now. I need to catch up.
Thank you, Atul. But the point of language here is that it helps us to be able to deliver the right message. And when you deliver the right message to a person in the language that they can understand from your own lips, the impact is a little different. We talked about, Laura talked essentially about the dynamic dependence, and Mukti gave an exceptional example of how we have to depend on each other, that the community exists for the individual and the individual exists for the well-being of the community. So leadership has to be on a multidimensional. We have to take a multidimensional approach to leadership. We have to be humble going forward. We have to be empathetic. We have to look at how do we pull out resilience and impact out of people. And leadership has to always recognize going forward that whatever we do, that the client is central to every action, every decision, every policy, etc. It is not about us. It's easy for those of us, quote unquote, in high positions to think that we run the show. We don't run the show. Christ did not come to run the show. Christ came to be humble, to be respectful, to care about who he was trying to touch. And that's where we have to be in terms of our leadership understanding, to make sure that we come down. Leadership has to come down to the level of the people we serve, and make sure that our humility, and that's the word that keeps resonating with me, is that leadership has to be humble in all of its precepts, so that people can deal with us in a different kind of way, and we can deal with our communities in a different kind of way.
Thank you so much, Katey. I think your themes, if you will, the message of at the end of the day, you have to keep the client, the beneficiary, is central to all this. And I want to come back to this as we get into the final few minutes. But in that, how do you deal with our clients? For us, they are the poor, the extremely poor, even the ultra poor, and with each other with that same sense of humility. At the same, how do you build resilience, right? How do you build empathy?
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. But, let me ask Mukti, what have you learned, both yourself, but as well watching and observing and supporting the people you serve, your health workers and their clients, the women and the children in the villages?
One of the things that we learned through the pandemic is the agency of the women. The women are the leaders, like Laura and Katey say. Women are central to our work, and they are the center of their community. And through this pandemic, there were a couple of lessons that we learned. One is you give the women the responsibility, you give them the confidence that they can do it, and they will go and give you back more than what you have taught them. And that is what we have learned. And the second thing was the interdependency on each other through different organizations, the networking, because the pandemic was a time when, for the first time in my 20 plus years of working in Healing Fields Foundation, first time ever, different civil society actors came together as organizations. We formed a national network of about 69 organizations, starting with agriculture, to self-help groups, to water sanitation, to construction, to education, to healthcare. All of us found a common purpose, even though all these years, we all assumed that the poor, we were all working for the poor. But what the pandemic showed was we were just not working for the poor, we were working for ourselves. And for me, that realization it changed my life, because ultimately when all of these organizations came together to see the magnitude of the problem and how we networked, we held each other, we supported each other to be able to support the poor. And that was extremely valuable lesson for me personally. And if we helped each other, if we worked with each other, the kind of impact, the kind of change, the kind of relief that we would provide was humongous. And like earlier, Laura was talking about trust. The other important thing for us was the trust of our benefactors, the trust of our donors in us. For organizations, donors like Opportunity International, for them to come forward and say, we trust you to use our money effectively. That meant a lot, because that added extra responsibility on us to be able to use the money judiciously and responsibly. And family and friends who came forward without even we asking for it, the outpouring that we saw and the giving that we saw was mind-boggling. At one level, people were losing jobs. There were a lot of fear, lot of anxiety, but they opened up their purse strings. And not just the people who had money, even our own community health entrepreneurs. One of the women in Balia, in eastern eastern UP, Uttar Pradesh, that is one of the poorest states of the country, poorest part of that particular poor state of the country. She found a boy about 9 or 10-year-old who was suffering with stomach pain. His mother had died a few years ago. Father was an alcoholic. He was taken care by the community. Each house was giving him some food. And of course, he had a hut and he sat there. And when the community health entrepreneur, she went in to do a health education. Some of them said, this child has been suffering with stomach pain. And she heard him cry. She went there and asked him, because we had also trained her as an acute care provider. She touched his stomach, palpated, and she saw something there, maybe something like a tumor. Immediately, she said, this child needs to be shifted to the hospital. Now, who was going to pay for that? What she did was she gave in her money. She went house to house, went to the head of the village, and altogether she collected about 35,000 rupees. That is approximately about $500, and took the child to the hospital, and they found that he had a tumor in his stomach and he had to be operated. And she stayed with him in the hospital and got him operated and brought him back home. Nobody taught her. Nobody told her. That was the kind of agency, that kind of leadership, and that kind of responsibility the women took upon themselves. And the networks that they had created with the hospitals and with the donors came in a long way. And trust, interdependability, networking, and an empathy, and knowing that we are serving the poor is extremely important. And that is what taught me, because whatever work we have done is minuscule compared to the work that the women have been doing during this pandemic. And there is a lot more that we could support and help them and train them to do a lot more there.
Thank you so much, Mukti. What a story, and what a reminder. You know, it's we could all. I mean, our minds are. I know for each of us goes back to similar contexts and stories that we've experienced in our own life. But you know, I was listening to Mukti, and what I realized was that her community health worker, that 9-year-old boy, it was possible because. That particular event, because someone in Switzerland cared, someone in Ghana was willing to actually, you know, talk to people in different languages and set up a voice response system. Someone in Chicago was willing to write a check or spend time, you know, managing and this web of interdependence. It's that as humanity, what we've learned, to your point, is we were working for ourselves. Mukti, and now, you know, realizing that's not going to make it and cut it, we have to work for each other and together. Thank you for that. I mean, Laura, I'm going to turn to you as we close. Thoughts from yourself. You know, what do you take away? What was, and I'll take a bit of a risk. You know, what was your biggest aha?
For me, I think it was aha for me, in that essentially seeing the rest of even my organization have the aha moment, really, of like, they are seeing that dynamic interdependence in action now and living that. And for me, that is going to really help continue to shift. We talk a lot about what's the future of work now. I think there's also a lot of conversation about how are we working and how are we working together, a little bit like what we've been talking about today. And I think we're going to see much more than of these, not just a couple of niche teams working on these kind of topics within a large organization like mine, but many more teams making that part of their modus operandi, business as usual, to be thinking about who should we be partnering with, and especially around topics that are environmentally or socially related. What is the impact of our work, and who do we need to be engaging on that? And I think we'll see a lot more connection and a lot more equality in the dynamic, hopefully, as well, and more hybrid structures or setups as a result, so that we're no longer talking about all these different players, but a lot more also potentially around commercial businesses thinking more socially and social businesses thinking more commercially and meeting a little bit more in the middle. So that's it's less, there are more shades between.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. As that we all have to more interdependence, more integration, working together, and knowing when to hand off, if you will, the batons to each other, hold hands. Yeah. Katey, your biggest aha.
Well, there was a confirmation for me more than an aha moment. There is a Zulu concept term called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu comes from the phrase, Zulu phrase, and if you permit me, let me speak a little Zulu. It says, Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngamuntu. And what it literally means is that a person is a person through other people. I am because you are, and because you are, I am. And essentially, it goes back to what Laura is talking about and what Mukti has so beautifully described in action, is that going forward, this collective upliftment, this Ubuntu, which embodies love, it embodies truth, it embodies peace, it embodies happiness, it embodies eternal optimism, it embodies inner goodness, will have to be the order of the day. It is how we're going to have to do business going forward. We will have to realize, and I think what business has got to do going forward is that business will survive, the community will survive if the individual survives. Because this pandemic didn't just happen in Ghana, it didn't just happen in Switzerland, it didn't just happen in India. It happened all over the world. And the solutions that are going to be found will have to be found from all over the world. If people in the US vaccinate themselves and don't vaccinate people in Ghana, guess what's going to happen? The pandemic is not going to go away. So, through this mutual dependence on one another, this dynamic interdependence is the order of the new world. And so you're right. This is the new silver lining for me in how we do work. And going forward, this is what the world is going to have to be. Unless we hold each other's hands, our circle is not going to be complete.
Thank you so much, Katey. You're so right. The circle of life. I go back to sometimes you draw inspiration and learnings from all places. And in fact, I watched with my children when they were young the Disney movie, The Lion King, and the circle of life. It continues when you hold hands and you recognize that sense of interdependence and interconnectedness. So I'll close with that to thank all of you. Laura Hemrika, the head of the Credit Suisse Foundation, Katey, Assem, chair of the Opportunity International Bank in Ghana, and the international board member for Opportunity itself, Mukti Bosco, head of the Healing Fields Foundation in India, for your time today, but more importantly, for your leadership over now for us many years of partnership and leadership, of serving the poor together, and in this time of crisis to truly becoming interconnected and interdependent. Thank you for your words. Thank you for inspiring me. I'm a frontline activist, so thank you for inspiring me and our listeners, the Ideagen community. Those of you who've been with Ideagen, thank you for listening and tuning in. Those of you who are new today, I hope you'll stay on to listen to the other podcasts and sessions that are being recorded. And a big hats off to George Sifakis, to Christian and the Ideagen team for giving us this opportunity to talk about the impact of the pandemic, not only on our organizations, on partnership, on us as leaders, but really on the poor of the world. It's I hope and pray it's been a time of learning, inspiration for all of you. Thank you so much. I'll close with what I started. To go fast, go alone. To go far, go with friends. So to three of my best friends, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.